Good evening. Honorable Shri Arun Jaitley, Indian Minister for Finance, Corporate Affairs and Information and Broadcasting. Professor Craig Jeffrey, Director of Australia-India Institute. Members of Indian Delegation, Captains of Indian Industry, members of Australian and Victorian governments, members of the academic fraternity in Melbourne, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen in this room and also outside. I, Manika Jain, Consul General of India in Melbourne, extend you a very warm welcome to this very special panel discussion on Indian economy with the Union Minister of India, Mr. Arun Jaitley. Before I introduce the Minister, let me acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered and pay my respects to the elders past and present, and any elders who may be here today. I also acknowledge Mr. Ted Bellew, former Premier of Victoria, Ms. Penny Fowler, Chairperson, Herald and Weekly Times, Professor Keith Nugent, Acting Vice-Chancellor, La Trobe University, Deputy Vice-Chancellors and Pro-Vice-Chancellors of various universities. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Arun Jaitley was born on 28 December 1952, was married to Sangeeta Jaitley in 1982, and has 2 children. Minister Jaitley is currently Union Minister of Finance, Corporate Affairs and Information and Broadcasting in the Bharatiya Janata Party-led government headed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He is also the leader of the Rajya Sabha, that is upper house of the Indian Parliament. Mr. Jaitley is a senior member of the BJP and has held cabinet portfolios of commerce and industry and law and justice in the NDA government led by Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee from 1998 to 2004. He was also the leader of opposition from 2009 to 2014 in the upper house of Indian Parliament. Minister Jaitley was designated senior advocate and appointed as the Additional Solicitor General of India in 1990. He is a distinguished lawyer, which I say from my personal experience, sir. He is one of my celebrity seniors from Shri College of Commerce and from Delhi Law School, from where he graduated in 73 and 77 respectively. I am really honored and proud to say that we share our alma mater. Minister Jaitley was the president of the Students' Union of University of Delhi in 74. He was an active leader of the student wing of BJP, then Jan Sangh, who also underwent preventive detention during the proclamation of internal emergency in India. In his prolific career as a lawyer, Minister Jaitley has made significant contributions in the areas of economic liberalization and legal reforms. He is recipient of several distinctions, including Doctor Honoris Causa, for outstanding performance. He was selected for Outstanding Parliamentarian Award for 2010. He is an avid writer on contemporary legal political issues and has written extensively in periodicals and newspapers. He is also a sports enthusiast, and his love for cricket is well known. Minister Jaitley has been the architect of India's 3 consecutive budgets since 2014. The latest one was tabled just a month ago, which has been hailed particularly for addressing the challenges of growth in Indian countryside, where a majority of population still resides. The distinguished feature of Minister Jaitley's budgets has been for putting a long-term pathway to economic reforms. The economic reforms envisaged by this present government have put India on the growth trajectory of plus 7%. UN report has estimated that India will grow at 7.7% in 2016, overtaking China. Moody's has pegged the growth at 7.8%. Different agencies have estimated India's GDP to grow at 7.5% or more, and in the current year, the country is poised to do even better in the coming years. I know you are all getting a bit impatient to hear from Minister Arun Jaitley on prospects of Indian economy, the challenges of inclusive growth, and reform agenda of the Government of India. But before I hand over the floor to Professor Craig Jeffrey, Director of the Australian Indian Institute, to take this evening further, I would like to share Minister Jaitley's thought on India and her potential. And I quote him, "I've asked myself this question very often, and I am now of the considered opinion that India's greatest strength, which when we speak in terms of our civilization, our culture, our sovereignty, is unquestionable, however, lies in the great potential and the sense of enterprise that the Indian people have, who despite many odds have the indomitable will and capacity to grow," unquote. Thank you all, and now over to Professor Craig Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Manika. First of all, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which the event is taking place today, the Wurundjeri, and pay respect to their elders and families past and present. I'd like to acknowledge the many distinguished guests present in this room, most importantly, the Honourable Minister himself, Mr. Arun Jaitley. We're delighted to be co-hosting this event with the Consulate General of India, Melbourne, and I'd like to thank the Consul General, Ms. Manika Jain, and her team for all their assistance in organising today's event. The importance of this visit, I think, can be highlighted by drawing attention to the very large number of notable people who are in this room, and I cannot name them all because it would take us right through till 6 o'clock. But I would like to acknowledge the former Premier of Victoria, Ted Bellier, the chairperson of the Herald and Weekly Times, Ms. Penny Fowler, and the VC representatives from the University of Melbourne, La Trobe, Monash University and Deakin. I'd also like to welcome colleagues from DFAT and from the Victoria State Government. We're delighted to also be hosting the FICCI business delegation here in Melbourne, who I know have been travelling with the Minister all week, and Dipin Regani, the National Chairman of the AIBC, who has also been travelling with the Minister. I'd also like to acknowledge His Excellency Mr. Navdeep Suri and Her Excellency Ms. Harinder Sidhu, and I would also finally like to thank the AII team, and particularly Simone Traglia, for organising today's event. I want to start I suppose rather indulgently, with an anecdote that comes from my own research. I'm a geographer and an anthropologist who works on India and have been for the last 20 years. And I wanted to start with an incident in 2012 in the North Indian city of Meerut, which you must know quite well. It makes 80% of the world's cricket equipment, apparently. I was sitting in Meerut talking to a friend called Mirpal Singh. Mirpal was a student in Meerut College. He was in his late 20s, and he tried 6 times to get a job in the Indian Army. Each time he'd failed, his friends promoted him 1 rank in the Indian Army. So he was Major Mirpal in 2012. A sick humour, which will be familiar to you from your student days in Delhi, Minister. I asked Mirpal Singh whether he'd considered getting another type of job. "There's none available," he replied. I asked whether he considered starting a business. "I don't have the skills, contacts or bribe money," he said. "Enough, my life is just passing time." "Kuch nahi kar raha hoon, bas main time pass kar raha hoon." Puri Hindi aati hai to mere bare mein mat boliyega. Time pass have become a profession for many of the 20-something youth who I got to know, and I have got to know over a 20-year period in Meerut. To such an extent, of course, that the government have waded in, and in Meerut now I've seen a sign to prevent student loitering that says, "If you've got nothing to do not do it here." Of the cliches that surround contemporary India, the one about the country being a place of contradictions is one of the most common. And like most cliches, it contains a great deal of truth. India has a burgeoning economy and a successful plural democracy. It's made huge strides in reducing the twin burdens of disease and extreme poverty in the past 30 years. There's a rising middle class. People are ambitious. There's been a huge increase in the uptake of education, now among girls as well as boys. There's a confidence about the country. There's been a communications revolution, which has had a whole series of positive social and technological effects, as we know from the work of Robin Jeffrey, who's here today. And at the grassroots level, there's been a citizenship revolution, with increasing sections of society coming to apprehend and perform the norms of liberal democracy. And yet, India remains a place marked by inequality. Inequality around class, around caste, around gender. And of course, where people are marked by multiple forms of inequality, for example, Dalit young women, they often find themselves doubly or even triply disadvantaged. There have been major difficulties that the Indian state has faced in social sector reform in a context of a country as large demographically as India, and in terms of the broad-based inclusive provision of education and health. These social contradictions are lived contradictions. They're embodied, for example, in the rickshaw puller who can't buy their vehicle, the Dalit entrepreneur who can't get a loan, the people like Mirpal Singh dreaming of, in his words, becoming something, but feeling, in a key sense, marooned by modernity. Taken together, I think these abiding contradictions hint at three intertwined major challenges facing the Indian state over the next 2 decades. And I'd be thrilled to hear your reflections, Minister, on these challenges and other ones that you see emerging over that kind of time frame. We don't often have a chance to talk about India with that long-term perspective in mind. First of all, a need to further regulate the economy to ensure fair competition, accountability and transparency. And I should say, moves to address these challenges are already well advanced. It's a question of how to consolidate and extend their remit. Second, the need to provide training and educational opportunities and jobs for India's vast and growing youth population. Mirpal Singh is 29. There are more 29-year-olds in India than there are people in Australia. The enormity of this challenge is one that I know is not lost on your government. I'd be very interested to hear you reflect on that issue of how to make good on the demographic dividend. And third, the need to balance these simultaneously economic, social and political objectives with the need to protect and nurture the environment, and also protect and nurture those lowest in the social hierarchies that exist in India. It should not be taken for granted, I think, that these challenges will be met. There are major Latin American economies that boomed for several years and then fell back. I'm hopeful that they'll be overcome. A feeling that owes as much to my everyday experience of fieldwork in North India as it does to sober economic analysis. As Mirpal Singh puts it, Dunya umeed par chalte hain. The world runs on hope. Umeed is a constant theme of my research. I'm also hopeful that Australia can be partners in India's development agenda. Both countries are united by a federal, secular, plural, democratic state, by the priority that they're placing on inclusive growth. And, as I was saying earlier in a different context, by, I think, a common substratum of shared understanding based around sport, around food, and also around a certain kindness to strangers, an informal public conviviality, a kind of have-a-go feeling that one sees breaking out in all sorts of informal contexts. I ardently hope that this event can be part of a wider effort to ensure that India and Australia work together at their two corners of Asia to drive forward this ambitious and inclusive economic and political agenda. I'll leave it there. I'd be delighted to hear you respond to any aspect of what I've just said that interests you.
Well, thank you very much for a very detailed comment, and for also forewarning me that you understand Hindi quite well. So I'll have to be careful otherwise in your presence. I think some of the issues that you've raised are real. And any system cannot really ignore them. India is growing rapidly, but the very size of the country, the social hierarchies, the historically disadvantaged people are a reality. And consequently, the inequalities also become a part of that reality. I had in the last 1 week two opportunities, one yesterday at Canberra and one at the Australian Open National University, and one last week at New Delhi, to speak on two different subjects which may partly be of interest to you, particularly in view of the introduction that you've given. In Delhi, it was on the economic empowerment of the minority communities. And yesterday, it was on the entire gambit of financial inclusion. The response that I have, not necessarily disagreeing with a lot of what you have said, the entire economic exercise is, in the first instance, reaching a certain section of population. So you have, out of the 1.2 billion people, you have an expanding middle class, a significant addition being made to the lower belly of that middle class. So today it would be 35 to 40%. Even below this, there is an increasing aspirational class. And particularly in the last 1/4 century, 25 years, the expansion of the educational facilities, there's a huge desire in that aspirational class to be added to this. And therefore, I see a lot of people in this whole process who are actually benefiting. High trajectory growth also creates another situation where governments are financially more empowered. And therefore, to pull up these people who are below who are historically socially disadvantaged or economically disadvantaged, you just can't rely on the growth taking place, and a 7 or 8 or a 9% growth will automatically impact on all. And therefore, and this is a point I made at the Australian National University yesterday, the Indian model, while necessarily having replaced the regulated economy into a more market-centric economy, has to have a social conscious. And that social conscious or compassion added to it must necessarily include that the empowered state, rather than just depending on pulling up these people out of poverty on the strength of growth, the governments put in additional resources in order to benefit those whom the benefits have not reached. Now, who are these people? If you look at the social structure, certainly the Dalits, the scheduled castes, the tribals. In fact, the one area where the quality of life in India has not improved is the tribals. And if you ask me what is the single most important challenge in the Indian story, how to get the tribals into the mainstream process, the advantage of job reservations, which has now continued for a very long time, its impact on the scheduled caste is quite visible. But on the tribals, particularly in the central part of India, it's quite slow. Then you have, in terms of the urban-rural divide, urban centers are really engines of economic activity, and therefore people are able to find jobs to sustain themselves or generate some employment. As far as the rural areas are concerned, the inequality is writ large on the fact that 55% of the population involved in agriculture and 15% of India's GDP comes from agriculture. And therefore, those in services are much better, manufacturing is all right. But those involved in agriculture, except a very handful of the big farmers, the others are in a challenging, difficult situation. And therefore, governments across the period, in the last 2.5 decades particularly, in some way or the other, have moved on this model of expediting higher growth rates and using the resource for the benefits of a certain category of the population. Now, if you ask me specifically what do I have in mind, and if I had to give this illustration, in a detailed talk I delivered yesterday, I had elaborated some of the steps taken by governments. The one emphasis has been to empower the rural areas in terms of giving them the kind of facilities, or coming closer to the kind of facilities which would be available in Indian cities. So today you have a plan that every village in India must be connected by a road. We intend to finish that by 2019. The Prime Minister had envisaged a plan that no village in India should be without electricity. We've been able to identify 18,000 of them. Now each one is being specifically targeted. We've already crossed 5,000. So you have still a balance of about 13,000. You have farmers in distress taking loans and unable to pay, and some of them commit suicide, which you must be reading about. So providing them with some kind of a interest subsidy or a subvention. The top priority being given by both the central and the state governments to irrigation in the rural areas. The previous government had brought out a scheme. Some of us were critical about the manner of its implementation. With some modifications, I've revived it, and it's been, last year was quite successful. This year I've added more money to it, the rural employment guarantee, so that subsistence levels could be maintained. So these are all various instruments by which we are putting resources, financial resources, and creating assets in rural India so that the quality of life itself could be improved. Irrigation is one area which immediately brings results the very next season. So we've had states, parts of Gujarat, some parts of Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, where you've had significant double-digit growth in agriculture each year because of the irrigation projects which were set up in those particular states. And I think this part of the problem has to be tackled on that basis. The second issue which you mentioned, with regard to segments of population, obviously, I can't claim that with a 1.2 billion population, either the government or India's private sector can give employment to all. The employment opportunities, in fact, the large structured industry whose representatives are with me in this delegation, the total number of jobs the large structured industry has created in India is about 20 million. And we have smaller establishments in the unorganized sector, almost about 57 million. They've ended up creating 120 million jobs. And therefore, we're using this particular model. Economic growth would strengthen large industry, it would create jobs. But at the same time, this particular segment, which has created a large number of jobs, and it becomes a job provider through self-employment, and these people who, instead of being job seekers, also become job providers. There's a major shift, and you used a phrase that these people have no source of financing or funding themselves. Now, this is one of the major initiatives which have been taken, which has been highly successful. Last year, we started a program, it's called the Mudra scheme, where all banks, whether in the public or the state, the private sector, have been advised that a percentage of lending, of small microfinance directly and through microfinance agencies, and these are not very minuscule, by Indian standards it can go up to 10 lakh rupees, must be provided to entrepreneurs at the banking rates of interest. Otherwise, these people were dependent on exploitative rates of interest. And this has been a runaway success. So you've had over 20 million small entrepreneurs in the very first year taking advantage of this scheme. Each branch is queued up with hundreds and thousands of people. And the current year we've increased the target amount by another 50%. And therefore the entire object is that a very significant part of this population needs to be brought into this ambit of generating their own job creation through small and medium businesses. I went and attended some of their functions and I asked them, so each one of the ladies, and 73% of the people who've taken money in this are women. The recovery rates of the banks is extremely high. It's almost near total. So each one has a card. They go to the ATM, they borrow money within the limits prescribed. Somebody would sell vegetables, somebody would be a fruit vendor, some lady living in a slum has established a beauty parlor, somebody has established a tailoring unit in her village. And the target is to return the money before midnight so that you can save one day's interest. And it's been a runaway success. Now, this is one illustration that I gave you. How do you improve upon their quality? Now that our own resource mobilization has slightly improved, are we only rationalizing subsidies? For instance, this year, we saved a considerable amount from the oil price decline. And we took an initiative that some section of the subsidies, which were even the wealthier in India were enjoying it, they should be ousted from it and it should be only meant for the more deserving people. Now we are using a significant part of that resource to put that money actually at the benefit of these people. Now 3 proposals that I have made. We provide cooking gas subsidy to all. Now we've deleted a certain segment of population from that entitlement. Using a direct cash benefit, we've saved about 25% more. Now what have we done with that money? So the lowest segment of Indian population, we are picking up 50 million families, 15 million this year, and over the next 3 years, the lowest in India who use that traditional Indian chula with firewood, which is detrimental to health. So the government would now provide them with the cooking gas. So you help their quality and standard of living. So that saving which we make from the reform process goes directly to them. What do we do about these farmers in indebtedness? So 75% of the premium being shared by the central and the state government, the farmer has to contribute only 25% of it.
Right.
So his entire crop for its full value would now be insured. So in case you have a drought, he still is able to repay back the loans that he's taken and not driven to suicide. Or take, for example, for the 1/3 of India's population, we've now come out, the details are being worked out, but the principle I have announced with a free health, state-supported health insurance, which enables them not only in the overcrowded public health institutions, but also which entitles them to get treatment in private health institutions. So under this particular model, when you ask the question, can I give jobs to 1.2 billion people or the adults who are eligible? Obviously, the government can't be oversized and overburden itself. But you'll have to create mechanisms by which these people are able to generate a lot of employment for themselves. And the advantage of this increased reform from the market economy itself comes and is plowed back to the advantage of this population.
It's an extremely helpful answer, and I in some ways don't want to cut you off, but I'm slightly aware of time, and I know that there are 400 people in the audience roughly who are desperate to ask you questions and would therefore try to open things up to questions. We have a couple of roving microphones. The first hand I saw was here at the front. Yes, you, sir. Can we just wait for a moment for a microphone?
Thanks.
If you'd like to give your name and then ask a question.
Yes, my name is Abhimanyu Kumar. I just have a very small comment before I ask my question. Mr. Jaitley, I would like to congratulate you for running a government which is 100% corruption free, which is very rare in India. And you are one of the people who provide a kind of morality in Indian politics which is unheard of. since I lived my life there. So I congratulate you for that. And my question will be, farmers in India. I've been here in Australia for 13 years, but the farmers' suicides, what are the radical changes this government can bring so these farmers' suicides can stop? That would be my spot-on question here. Thank you.
So, Minister, I think that was a compliment and a question. I think you've partly already answered the question, but did you have a further comment before I take other questions?
You see, as far as the second part of your question is concerned, to be more specific, why does the farmer commit suicide? He commits suicide because of financial distress situation. And the distress is caused, he borrows money from either a cooperative bank or a normal bank or any institution, and his agricultural produce doesn't fetch him enough in order to pay back. And his agriculture therefore has to be made remunerative. Now, systematically, each of the proposals which we are trying to undertake, for instance, I'll just refer to two of them. I'm not getting into details of the rural infrastructure I've already mentioned. One is this guarantee him his cost plus some profit as a part of an insurance. So if there is a drought, if there is a flood, if there is a hailstorm, at least the farmer still gets some money back. So he pays minuscule premium and gets the compensation back so that he is able to repay back that loan. The second, one of the liberalization steps that I took, essentially with the idea of helping the farmer, 25% of India's agricultural produce gets wasted because the food processing industry is almost non-existent. Only 4% of what we produce is processed. So I have now liberalized this budget, and said 100% foreign direct investments. We are willing to invite anyone who has the capacity to invest and buy this agricultural produce from this farmer and set up food processing, so that at least this 25% of this wastage, if we are able to check, we can significantly empower the Indian farmer.
Pradeep, you had a question.
My name is Pradeep Paneja from University of Melbourne. I work on China, and often I'm asked to comment on comparing China and India. And I lived in China for a number of years. And what you've just said about the kind of things that you're doing, also you kind of pointed out that there's a lot of continuity from the previous government in what you're doing. And obviously there are new initiatives that your government is introducing. One of the issues that comes up often in talking or comparing China and India is the state capacity. I mean, Chinese government is not more enlightened than the Indian government, I think. But on the question of state capacity, the Chinese government does have a significant capacity to execute projects. What is your government doing to enhance the state capacity? Because ultimately you're working with the same bureaucracy as the previous government.
You see, as far as the similarity that I mentioned, which you have observed, I think in the implementation and in some ideas there would be a difference. With regard to liberalization and further liberalization and quick decision making, there would be a difference. But I think there is a larger consensus in an Indian model, which irrespective of any government past or future, you'll have to expedite your growth rates, grow much faster, and utilize the benefits that you get out of that system for those whom otherwise the benefits don't reach. Now, having said that, I think there are a few fundamental differences between India and China when the state capacity is involved. The Chinese development model was state-driven. The Indian model is entrepreneurship-driven. And therefore, even when the state intervenes to help a particular section, it is to create entrepreneurship in that section. For instance, in the next 3-4 days, we are launching a scheme where the state is taking an initiative which is called Stand Up India. And we've picked up 2 two target beneficiaries. A, the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, and B, women entrepreneurs. And the whole idea is that every branch of every bank has been told that it is mandatory for them to create one entrepreneur from each of these two segments, and there's a certain level of funding that they'll have to do. So each branch would be supporting one Dalit entrepreneur and one woman entrepreneur. So the idea is 250,000 entrepreneurs being created from these otherwise deprived sections. But the model is not the state doing business. The model of the state policy is that create entrepreneurship. I do believe that in the long run, an entrepreneur-driven model is more sustainable than a state-driven model. And therefore, I think an Indian model has its own strengths. The capacity, however, is subject to the fact being that India is a democracy. And so are many other democracies, but India is also a very noisy democracy. And therefore, you have at times to governments, and all shades of government have to work within an obstructive environment in order to take a decision. And therefore, in a democracy, decision-making will never be as fast as in a country where there is no democracy. And therefore, obviously, you can't compare the capacities of the two. So, a government in India would first have to convince its own party, the parliament. These are the different hierarchies of opinion makers. They'll have to. And this is a problem common to, I've seen this happening in England, in Italy, in Australia, in India. Now, all four of them have to then go and convince their upper houses to yield to the wisdom of the lower house, which is a more directly elected house, and then carry public opinion with you. I don't think in that sense capacities can be judged between a democracy and a non-democracy.
So in the interest of democracy, there were far too many hands for me possibly to get through everyone, but there were some that have stood out. So before you get up, what I will do, Minister, if you'll permit me, is take 3 questions and then see if we've got about 5 minutes left. So I'll take 3 questions and then give you a couple of minutes to respond.
Just take a backside of a paper.
Yeah. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Jaitley sir, my name is Neeraj Nanda, and I was a student of Delhi University when you were the president of Delhi University Students' Union in the very emergency days, And I suspect you used to come to the law faculty coffee house, and I was also there. So I know we can't recognize each other much, but my question is, sorry for that. My question is, in the Sydney conference on Make in India, very simple question, you invited Australia to participate in it, which is very good. But I suspect Australia has very little manufacturing itself. So what were you actually trying to say? Thank you.
So in the glasses there, yes. Angus, if you'd be kind enough, thank you.
Jared Hepburn, Melbourne Law School. Surely any discussion
can you repeat
of
India's...
India's...
Your name, sorry?
It's Jared Hepburn.
Right.
Surely any discussion of India's economic future has to include discussion of collaboration with academia. And yet the recent events at JNU and Hyderabad University seem to pose quite a grave threat to academic freedom. Now, you've recently dismissed these events as the works of ultra-left movements and jihadists, in your words. And you've said that this is not the kind of thing that would dent India's image overseas. But since then, we've had letters of support from 1,200 or more, perhaps, academics in India and outside as well, supporting people like Kanhaiya Kumar, Nivedita Menon, more recently Jean Drez. And you surely can't dismiss this kind of support in similarly extreme terms. The world clearly is watching what India is doing on this front. So how can Australian academics and others work with our colleagues in India who are clearly in fear of what they see as a growing climate of authoritarian nationalism in the country?
Okay. There's one question at the front here that someone's had their hand up a long time, and then we'll, I'm afraid in the interest of time, have to open it up for your response, Minister. Yeah.
You can take 2
it was just
sorry.
here, but
sorry.
I'm sorry. Could you pass?
Minister. I
You
just
can take
wondered
2-3 more questions.
Okay.
Which industry in India do you think? Which industry do you believe is going to deliver India's first global brand?
Right. Minister, if you can answer the questions quickly, you've indicated that you'll take a couple more. Sir, with the patterned shirt at the back there, eagerly putting your hand up. A little bit further back. Oh, no, everyone's wearing the same shirt. No, a little bit further back. Yeah, I've seen your hand up for a long time in the blue patterned shirt. Yes, if you'd like to ask your question.
Can you pass?
Yeah, yes, you.
Hi, sir. I am so glad to be here. It's a simple question. Can we expect to remove reservation from India? It's like, depending upon the talent of the students, need to organize the jobs, not on the reservation. Can we expect your government to take further any in 2019? Can we expect from your government? It's a simple question. Should be based on the talent of the students, not on the reservations.
Okay, this is going to be the last question, I'm afraid. Sir, yes, you're here. If you'd like to, you've had your hand up for a very long time.
Honorable Minister, thank you very much for your talk today. My question is regarding the budget that I was going through, which was announced early this year. Something that really struck my attention was an increase in 330% in spending for women and children aid. I was very curious to know what kind of projects would be included in this particular increase. Thank you very much.
So, Minister, if you'd be kind enough to try to address those questions as quickly as you can. I know you have another meeting at 6:30.
Australian manufacturing experience, what do we look at when we look at the Make in India story, and what do we expect from Australia? I think one fact must be kept in mind that that India also over the last 2 decades has become a significantly large economy. And therefore, when we deal with the other important countries, we look at it as a two-way traffic. Indian industry setting up projects in those countries and vice versa. For instance, Indians have increasingly been making investment in Britain. For instance, India is one of the largest investors today. The largest job providers in England, the largest company which provides jobs in the United Kingdom is an Indian company. And therefore, it's a two-way traffic. But as far as Australia is concerned, there are 2 or 3 areas which I can straight away identify where I think Australia can be of considerable help. Resources is one area where Australia has a very advanced experience. I mentioned that one of our needs is food processing. Australia has a lot of experience in this area, and if Australian companies were to set up establishments in India, it will be very encouraging for us. India is a huge, in terms of numbers, for example, I can tell you there are 233 highways under construction today as I speak to you. 8,000 kilometers every year, that's our target, 30 kilometers a day. 400 railway stations by private sector investment to be redeveloped. This year I've given a target of regional air connectivity, 25 new airports to be set up. I can go on and on with ports and power and so on. This requires a lot of investments, and Australia, fortunately, in their own financial model, has funds which are looking for investments in other parts of the world, which will fetch them competing and competitive returns. And therefore, these are the areas where we are speaking to our counterparts in Australia. And I'm sure a number of them have shown a very positive reaction. Which are the Indian brands which are going to be the industries where brands could be created? I think you must bear in mind it's not merely the size of the market as far as India is concerned or its middle class. It's also a huge resource in terms of human resource development that India is creating. Technology is something which comes naturally to India. Now, in the post-liberalization era, there have been several segments of industry which have actually become success stories. IT became the first success story. Auto sector became a success story. Telecommunications became a success story. Pharmaceutical, particularly the generics, became a success story. So our ability, for instance, in healthcare and pharmaceutical, and particularly in the generic the pharmaceutical, our capacity to deliver world-class medicines and world-class treatment at a fraction of the cost compared to the developing world. So our ability to become a services hub, and in some of these areas now the Indian startups on the strength of technology are creating an impact. Now, which one of them will become a world beater is difficult for me to predict today, but this is something which really can happen. Reservations, do I see the end of it? No. I'd like to be very specific, even if I'm disappointing some people. I don't, in near foreseeable future, see the end of it for the reason. The historical backlog of deprivation has been so large that I don't think even with 68 years of post-independence and almost 64 years after the Constitution, we've been able to really set it apart. Please don't forget, as far as the scheduled castes in India are concerned, job reservation got the first ray of hope of development to those segments. Now, with regards to its functioning, we can have all kinds of opinions, but there are still socially and historically deprived sections which need the benefit. The tribals have still not benefited significantly enough. So have we reached a stage where we must review? There can always be good ideas with regard to how it must be implemented in future, but with regard to the need to continue with reservations, have they now subserved their purpose and we must think of finishing them? I don't think in near foreseeable future that time is going to come. This will have to continue for a longer period of time, and I'm absolutely clear about it.
Minister, we're going to have to stop. I wonder if you could just say a couple of words in response to the political question.
The two political questions.
We'll need to wind up.
Yeah, I'll just take that question last because I have important. As far as the women and child initiatives are concerned, we run one of the largest midday meal schemes in order to get young children of poor families into school. One of the incentives we give is that children are, besides being given education free and books free, they are also being given their meals free. So similarly, with regard to women, pregnant women, the kind of aid that state provides, this is all covered under that budget. And now with the increased resources, there are several segments where we've significantly increased the spending. And women and child spending is, in this regard, it's done through the state governments. Now, with regard to your question about the Jawaharlal Nehru University, let's have no doubts about the fact that India is a very strong democracy. The only time that we came close to losing the democracy was somewhere in the mid-70s for a brief period. And India showed a great resilience in coming back as a democracy. So the idea of India being a liberal democracy or free speech being in danger, I don't think those questions really arise at all. We must understand the incident which took place in the Jawaharlal Nehru University and the other campus that you've mentioned. I'm quite conscious of the fact that when you have standards of liberalism in educational institutions, an extra license may even be required. I used a phrase in Parliament that all of us as student activists have done it. I myself was the first person to protest against the emergency in 1975 and spend 19 months in jail, and therefore our commitment to maintaining that freedom is second to none. In fact, some of the people leading the protest, the political legacy they represent was the shameless supporters of the emergency. So let's be very clear about it. Having said this, what is it that India has been facing as a serious challenge besides poverty? We've been worst affected by the curse of terrorism. You have an incident in 1993 where close to 300 people are killed by the blasts in Mumbai. After a trial, and a trial process which goes on appeal and second appeal and Supreme Court and 5 different hearings in the Supreme Court, after having killed 300 people, injured 1,000 others, finally one man is to be punished for it. And a celebration in support of that one man is organized in one campus. That's what happened in Hyderabad. In the Jawaharlal Nehru University, I myself was locked up in the room when in 2001 Indian Parliament was attacked. We were in government at that time, and in fact the police came. I distinctly remember some of us were all put into a room and asked to stay back. And the firing was almost 20 to 30 feet away from where we were. The entire political leadership of India could have been wiped out. But for the action of the security forces, we lost a large number of our security people. The political leadership of India was saved. And after a long trial, appeals and counter appeals, one man is found guilty and he is punished. The celebration in Jawaharlal Nehru University was in his support. Now, let's be very clear. I am quite willing to say that you have a possible view which is against death penalty, which is a plausible view to have. Now, after a due process of law, several appeals, a lot of people being acquitted in the process, it is these 2 cases. And I can tell you, there is a large sense of revulsion in Indian public opinion in the function, in the protests that they organize. If you, since you understand Hindi, I can just repeat what is the slogan. The gentleman who attacked Indian Parliament, his name is taken and it said that we are ashamed of the fact that those who have executed you are still alive. And who has executed him? Judges of the Supreme Court.
Minister,
now, please. Please, I don't think it's a need for slogan.
No,
please, let's not get into this. Therefore, the idea, we have free speech, but if you read the Constitution of India, the sovereignty of India is an exception to the free speech principle. And I can assure you, nobody in India talks the kind of language which I am seeing in political debates happening in other parts of the world, including in Europe. I've seen after the Paris and the Brussels attack, some of the statements being made. I think we've shown as a mature society a considerable amount of restraint, and therefore this is an ideological debate, because openly if you raise slogans in support of those who bombed Mumbai or who bombed India's parliament, and then say our object is to break India. In fact, one of the slogans were Bharat ki barbadi, how India should be destroyed. India should be shattered into pieces. Now, surely you expect some ideological reaction from those who don't agree with them. And I can assure you, most of India doesn't agree with them.
I'm afraid we do have to draw things to a close. As you were speaking, Minister, I was reminded of Joan Robinson, the Cambridge economist, who said that if anything that can be rightly said about India, the opposite is also true. I also, for those of you who are interested, wanted to share with you that Mirpal Singh, when I last spoke to him on Skype, said to me, I asked him what he was doing, he said that after failing to acquire a position in the army 7 times, he set up a coaching institute in Meerut to train people to get positions in the Indian army. So, there are multiple brands of entrepreneurship, but I'd like to now call upon the Acting Deputy Vice-Chancellor International, Professor Simon Evans, to propose a vote of thanks.
Craig, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been treated this evening to a fascinating discussion of immense breadth. We have covered the range from the economic opportunity, the Indian economic miracle, of which our Prime Minister recently spoke at the Lowy Institute, the challenges of development in India, and some deep and profound political challenges that face India and will excite debate right across the world for a long time. We could talk at great length this evening about each of those issues. And we're very pleased, Minister, that we've had the time that we have had to talk about them. We're delighted that you have chosen to answer the questions, to engage in the discussion in the spirit of academic freedom and academic exchange. And we hope that very much continues, both in India and in here. We're thrilled to host the Australia-India Institute as a forum where this kind of discussion can happen and can continue. So, at the risk of not following Craig's injunction to be brief, can I once again thank all of those involved in organising this evening's event, thank Consul General Manika Jain for the support of the consulate, acknowledge the, and it's rare that we have this opportunity to say this, acknowledge the High Commissioners in the audience, not merely one. Thank you for being here. Thank you, distinguished guests. But above all, thank you, Honourable Minister, for your time, your generosity, your remarks, and your participation in this discussion. It's been a great pleasure to host you. Thank you.